the first service I did, I was really surprised at how everybody did settle down, in a sense, and find that sort of, they appeared to find that space within them. And that there was, we talked a bit about respect as well, and that continuum from tolerance through acceptance to respect. And that does happen in that sort of opening time, I think.
Is there anything else we noticed about, or what you would put in your model worship places that perhaps you haven't mentioned yet?
Yes, there was one idea of this particular lady had been at Greenham Common, and she was talking about the airfield and the missiles and all that, and then the fence, and outside that was a place where they could come with their ideas, which turned out to be more or less worship as far as she was concerned, against worship for peace, against the whatever was going on inside with the cruise missiles and the aircraft and everything else like that.
She had Peace Lane, didn't she? Running outside the airfield and Quaker Corner, where you'd have a meeting house, and absolutely. And,
yes, that was striking. Yeah,
and that notion of being in amongst it, not only on issues but where people are, I think, was part of that.
And it's about creating that inclusive space. Although, interestingly, thinking about Greenham Common, at the time, I did actually feel it. I never went there, I'm ashamed to say. Many of my friends did. And at that time, I felt rather excluded by these very right-on political women. So there's something about feeling welcome, and something about allowing in, as you were saying, the cloisters need to be open out, perhaps, as well as drawing in. And I think, again, we need that inclusivity.
One of the things I always suggested would be nice to have in a church, which I've never seen, is a stained glass window with a great big question mark. I think this would be fantastic. And I remember taking services in the Methodist Church a few years ago and having a service that struck a few people, really, in which the basic point was, believe things because you believe them, not because you think you're supposed to. And to sort of really promote that idea of a place of worship as being a place of honest questioning and honest doubting. This is not the place for the people who have it all wrapped up and know all there is to know. It is a place of questioning.
And acceptance, because part of the worship to me is feeling accepted, but also accepting of the people around and whatever they may be bringing.
So, as leaders of worship, which we all are, what do we think are the kind of essential elements of worship? Do you have any ground rules? Or
one of the things I think, coming from my interfaith training, is the importance of mood and setting. And this really came out of the discussion today about how that can create that transcendent, that more than that I spoke of earlier. So I try myself and reduce the number of words. I think we can get so many words. And to bring in silence and quiet and reflection, bringing people in as well as much as possible, because I think that really works. For me, is that sense of involvement. It's a two-way passage. And I think now, especially as we're moving towards the 500th anniversary of the Reformation, which was all about bringing people in, finding the divine within, and getting, in a sense, rid of priests. You know, we are all priests and ministers in many ways, and I think that's I like to emphasise in my.
It's quite
services.
Interesting that in the Methodist tradition they used to have really high pulpits at times. You would take a service and you'd get vertigo. You know, it was a bit much, and the problem with that in some ways was it was putting this emphasis on not only the ministry of the word as the central bit, but the importance of the person standing up there. And in my time, I saw the pulpits get lower and lower and lower, and people taking those old pulpits out. But I do notice a sea change, really, in that people actually want to be, or tend to want to be, more interactive, certainly here, in the style of worship that takes place, and less wanting to be told stuff.
Well, there's so much inherent wisdom that we have in our in our membership, in the people who come. Let's not squander it. Let's use it.
To me, the elements of silence and less wordiness are very important. But I also think that ideas of giving thanks, being grateful, allowing oneself to be part of other people. But you don't have to say a lot of words. If you're leading worship, you can just introduce a time of thankfulness, being grateful, and leave people to do their own thoughts as far as that goes, or a period of thinking about the world in general, or whatever particular problems there are. And again, leaving people to bring their own thoughts, not necessarily saying things the whole time. And to me, that's very important.
Again, in regular Sunday worship, as in our what we do, I tend to go with the old Methodist route, as I have mentioned, which is the approach, first of all. So getting into that frame. Ministry of the Word, which is not a phrase I'd particularly use now, but basically thinking about ideas and response. How do we respond to this? I would feel in a regular Sunday service that something is missing if we are not thinking outward as well as inward. Yes. That's why I would always have to have some kind of thinking about the issues of the world in there. Otherwise it feels selfish.
Yes. It's a bit me, isn't it? Otherwise, yeah.
But there's another part of me that says there are no rules. And this is possibly when some of the alternative worship experiences that happen here at Bayshill apply, because sometimes it is an event that is just about creating a space. It has you can have worship with no words. Yeah. You can have worship with no mention of God. Yeah. Potentially, all of these things. Yes. So sometimes perhaps we don't help ourselves by being overly prescriptive on what we mean by worship. There are a lot of people talking about, Alison's already mentioned walking across a hillside as an act of worship.
I think sometimes I can sense in a congregation that I'm not familiar with maybe a reluctance to accept silence. But I think it's very important to encourage people to be silent and to allow themselves to go into their minds and think about things, but also for them to allow other people to be quiet and do their own things. I think it's essential as part of worship.
And there's something about collective silence, which is so different. I used to teach people relaxation in a group, and they say, it's so different when we do it together. When I go home and just sit down and try and relax, they're not the same. And I think it's true. There is something about collective silence that is very special. There's a holding. There's a something that is very, very different and very special and precious.
So we do try and do that here. We do occasionally have a lovely, long, good silence interrupted by the bottle bank from the pub next door. So we are, we'll be in the middle of a silence and the bottles start crashing. But at least we can say someone got moved by the Spirit. Sorry.
Jokes get worse.
The jokes get worse on this podcast. Sorry about that, folks. That's just where we are. Well, we're coming towards the end now, but this is the November podcast. So each month we try and think, well, what are the things that are inspiring us about this time of year? So what inspires you about November, if anything?
Well, I must admit, I do. It is that creep towards the celebrations of the winterval, whatever, Christmas, solstice. So I do enjoy that because I love the singing. I love the carols, and for me it's that coming together and singing together is fabulous.
I would look forward to the Christmas time, but not until December. I get very annoyed when everyone starts trying to push Christmas too early for my liking. I enjoy the idea of the fallen leaves and scrunching through fallen leaves, the smell of fungi and the different sites, and the smell of the earth and the bare trees where you can see the skeletal outlines and all that sort of thing. I find very inspiring in November.
And I'm glad that we're now allowed to put the heating on.
Yeah.
It's acceptable.
Yes.
There's a period, isn't there, where if you put the heating on, you have to feel a little bit guilty. But it's okay now. It's not to be frowned upon. We're here. We can put the heating on. It's November. It's time, I think, for the comforts of home, for hot soup and good books and conversations around the kitchen table. It's time for our book of the month, and this month, selected by Cressida.
Yes, well, I am at the moment reading with actually a gathering of people who we read it together and discuss it, is The Power of Now, a Guide to Spiritual Enlightenment by the German Eckhart Tolle. And I am ashamed to say this was written in 1997, I think. And I've always thought of slightly, sort of mindfulness stuff, isn't it? And I was so grateful to be pointed towards it and to be encouraged to read it and think about it. There's a little one that goes with it, Practicing the Power of Now. I have been blown away. It's got so much in it that is one faith. He will talk about words that Jesus spoke that point us towards being present now together. Next paragraph, it will be about Zen, Buddhist approaches too. And it's about being present now. And that's the only moment we have. And I really recommend it. I think it's really, really good book.
So that's The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, our book of the month. The coffee pot is empty. It's almost time to go home, but I'm just flagging back to, I heard one of those Ernie Ray programs on Radio 4, Beyond Belief.
Yeah,
and I was a bit sad about this. He had a whole program on the death of the sermon, and I'm a bit of a fan of the sermon. I like an idea that's given room to breathe in a good 20 minutes. But he ended his program, as we're going to end this podcast, with a story about an old priest training some younger people in the art of sermon construction. And the instructions of this older and quite fierce priest were this: one thing you must never, 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 never do is be dogmatic. Thank you for listening. Join us again next month.